Brunel. You just heard from Kim, our host, and in a little bit you'll hear from Miss Emily Grant, who does all of the math videos on our website. And we will be walking you through the following items this morning. First, we're going to talk to you about who Protect Natick's Future is, and give you a little update on the budget challenges since June 6th. So if you were with us in the first meeting, there's going to be a little bit of a repeat information there. Hopefully it's a good refresher. We'll share with you what we've learned, and then we will share some frequently asked questions towards the end of our presentation, and then we'll open it up for a group discussion. And at that point, if you're at all able to turn on your camera, I'll turn my slide off, and it would be wonderful if we could all see one another at that point. Of course, I understand if you're having a bad hair day. And at the very end, we'll give you some action steps if you're interested in continuing in a variety of different ways, either with us or with your town meeting members or with the other town leaders. So let's start with who we are. You know by now that we are Protect Natick's Future. And there you see many of us. We are your neighbors. We are a group of parents that got involved on May 4th because of a list of cuts that came out that the schools were considering. And when we started asking questions about those cuts, we got some good advice from town leaders and from people that have been in this game way longer than we have, that these questions about the schools are actually intricately related to the questions about our town budget as a whole. And so we pivoted from just thinking about the schools and the cuts that were being made to thinking about this as holistically. And so we've created Protect Natick's Future. We are only 6 weeks old at this point, so I'm still going to ask for your consideration and that we will make mistakes. What I just clicked on is our website that we've developed. And you'll see here, if you want to go afterwards, there are, it tells you who we are, it tells you what we think about the budget. This here, Get Answers, if you click on it, there's an entire forum about questions that we've asked and subjects that you can click on and get as many answers as we've gotten. You can put your own questions up there. We'd love to see them. Additionally, this election survey, we've been so grateful to the Board of Selectmen, the school committee members that are running unopposed but still answered our questions, and to over 40 town meeting members. If you click on this town meeting link, you will get to see the responses of town meeting members in your different precincts, so that you know who you're voting for and what they stand by. And all of this is essential because these are the town leaders that are going to be deciding how we are spending the money that we'll talk about today. So that's who we are. We're your neighbors, and we're people that are deeply concerned about the, let me go back to presentation mode. Am I in presentation mode? Kim, can you see my full screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll go back there. Now I clicked on all the links. All right. I'm still learning how to do this. So here, this is what this team has created, and this is what we're thinking. We would like to help. Say that again.
You're good now. You have the presentation.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Help citizens better understand the current funding situation. It's why we'll be giving you so much background information today. We'd like to ensure that our voices are heard among the town's hired, elected, and appointed officials. That's all of our voices. That's not just one voice or one segment of the population, but we'd like to continue to elevate the voices of all of our neighbors. And with that education and with those voices, we'd like to endorse solutions and encourage collaboration across the departments. So let's think about some background, and Emily's going to share that with us.
So this is a repeat of what we talked about in the last session, but some people are new. So just kind of an overview to how our town government works. Some key terms, some key players, and what goes into making a budget. So key term would be a fiscal year, which is in this case, July 1st to June 30th. So the year that we're in right now, about to close out in 10 days, is fiscal year 20. And then on July 1st, fiscal year 21 starts. So the budget that's being worked on right now is fiscal year 21 budget. Some key players in terms of the town and in terms of the budget. So our town administrator is named Melissa Malone, and she's the one that puts together, with consultation with department heads, the schools, to put together a budget, to determine what the revenue will be. And that's with the support of the Board of Selectmen, who are a group of our elected officials. Then we also have another body called the Finance Committee, and that's a group of appointed members of our community. And they then take that budget and they go through it line by line, and they vet all of the expenses in the budget. They then typically come together with a recommendation that they can then give to the town meeting. Kind of at the same time, going on concurrently, the superintendent, Dr. Anna Nolan, comes up with a budget of what they see as the needs for the Natick Public Schools, and she's supported by the school committee, who is also a group of elected officials. And then perhaps most importantly in this process are our town meeting members. So our town meeting is made up of 180 members throughout 10 precincts around town, and your precinct is like a predetermined sort of neighborhood. And you can find out which precinct you are by going online. You can type in precinct map Natick, Mass, and you can look at the map to figure out which one you're on. There's probably an easier way, but that's how I do it. And Frank Foss is the town moderator. So he's sort of in charge of the town meeting, and he's the one that sets the dates, and he's the one that appoints the finance committees. So in some ways, the finance committee is sort of an advisory board to that. We also put on here that our town clerk, who's Diane Packer. She's super important always, but especially right now, because she's the one you would go to if you were wanting to run as a write-in candidate for town meeting. She's the person you'd give your name to. She's also the person that's in charge of pulling everything together for the election. So I think actually the date might have passed, but she's the one you would speak to if you needed a ballot. Now, in terms of the budget, there's basically two key numbers that go into a budget. It's the revenue projection and then the expenses. And so the revenue projection is just that. It's a projection. It's what the town of Natick expects to bring in fiscal year 21. And the expenses are what each department is budgeted to spend. And in the case of town government, that has to be a balanced budget. The revenue projection has to equal expenses in order for it to pass. So that little graphic on the bottom sort of takes you through the timeline of a budget, putting a budget together. So there's fiscal year 20, and then that's used as a way to, almost kind of as a jumping off point, to prepare a preliminary FY21 budget. So that all happened in January of this year. Preliminary budget was formed, taking all these things into account. Revenue projections were formed. Then typically what would happen would be in late spring, like March, an amended budget would be put out after FinCom had gone through everything, and then it would be brought to Springtown meeting. So in some ways, this process has been typical. In some ways, it has been not typical. So it's followed this process, but the main difference is between the green bar and the yellow bar, we've had COVID. And so it's obviously delayed that amended budget. It's delayed town meeting. And there's been some big changes to the budget in between those two bars.
So our budgets in Natick, this is just a big picture view based on the fiscal year preliminary budget. These are the key categories. We have municipal services in the green, the Natick Public Schools budget in the purple, the category other in the yellow, and Keefe Tech and shared expenses in the blue. So a couple things to note about those is that the Keefe Tech and shared expenses, the majority of that is actually shared expenses. Keefe Tech has a very small line item in that to support the students in our Natick school system that choose to go to Keefe Tech. The majority, however, are shared expenses between the other budgets. The other thing to note with other is that that yellow section, that is where our stabilization funds are, or the savings for the town. And where we pay, get money for pensions and just all of the sort of like other bus category, those things. And then the purple section is the Natick Public Schools. And the reason you don't see any departments underneath that is that Natick Public Schools receives one allocation, one appropriation from the town meeting, and then they choose to spend their money within their departments as they as they decide throughout the year. So they, in the green section, for example, each one of those sections, the Morris Institute Library, the Bacon Free, the Public Safety, I actually would say the libraries are probably together in their budget, but Public Safety, Public Works, they all get an individual budget. And when you add those individual budgets up, that creates the entire municipal services. One more thing to note on our slides once we make them available to you is that these links down here are all live. And so if you'd like to see, here we're showing the breakdown of the January preliminary budget that Emily just mentioned. If you'd like to see budgets from other breakdowns or other years, you can click this link, and I believe that takes you to a document. Is it ClearGov, Emily, or is that a different document?
Sorry, I missed that question because it
Does that link at the bottom of this take you to ClearGov, or does that take you to a different document?
I think that takes you to the preliminary budget.
Okay, great. And so then you'll see ClearGov links later on in our presentation.
So what were major impacts between the preliminary budget in January and then now? And that's a major loss in revenue projected for FY21. So the first row, fiscal 21 preliminary before COVID, is what the town was projecting for revenue, or what the town administrator was projecting for revenue in January. And then fiscal 21 amended would be what we're projecting for revenue now. So that purple column, state aid, is what comes in from the state in terms of funds for the schools and funds for the town. And that's down 20%, or the projection is down 20%, so about $3.4 million. The green column is local receipts, and so that's money from hotels and restaurants and businesses at the mall, things like that. And the projection for that is down 30%, so about $4.4 million. So that's the major areas of revenue projection loss. There's two other main categories, which is our tax levy, which is our property taxes. And that projection is fairly level. Our property taxes haven't dropped. And then the fourth category is considered other. And in that other category for revenue, it includes what's available to use for free cash, what we'd like to use out of stabilization funds, which are like savings funds, and then other receipts. And so the Board of Selectmen has voted to approve, what's the word I'm looking for, as their recommendation is to use some of our stabilization funds to help out with that. So this is included in this revenue, and that's something that town meeting will have to vote on. And so town leaders are struggling to figure out, how do you close this budget gap? You either take major service cuts, or you work in other ways. And so that's kind of what we'll go through.
So here we are in the budget process, and the orange and the pink lines are currently where we are. The gray represents what has happened before this. The town administrator published an amended budget to the select board on June 8th. And now that budget, along with the school committee's voted upon budget, I believe it was June 4th, those two budgets are being worked through FinCom. And with FinCom and the town administrator and the school committee and the superintendent, there's a lot of collaboration that happens to try to figure out if everybody's okay with all these numbers. Is this what we want to do as a town? And as those go through, eventually the FinCom will make a recommendation, or they will say not recommend, or there's a few other options. I know we have some members of FinCom on this call, so you guys can correct us later, but there are they will say whether or not they think this is a good idea, whether they're not sure, or whether they disagree with the idea, basically. And then later at the end of the month, we have the town election, June 30th. So if you haven't already asked for a ballot, at this point, that means that on June 30th, we need you to go to the ballot. Wear your mask, be safe, and please vote on June 30th live, because the town election elects the people who decide on the budget in the final moment. The town meeting will then usually occurs in March. It will now occur, because of COVID, sometime in July. I think the most recent number or date that we've heard is July 11th, and we'll find out more about that. So that's the process. That's kind of the background. And now we want to share with you what we know, what we've learned in the last 6 weeks.
Okay, so what we've put together in this section is sort of different perspectives that you'll hear on what's been cut and how much has been cut. So the first one is, what are the impacts of that revenue shortfall compared to where we were in January? So the first column, again, is fiscal 21 preliminary, which is that January budget. And then the second row is fiscal 21 amended, or now. So the purple column, NPS allocation, is down $4.1 million since where it was in January. The municipal allocation is down about $500,000. This shared category is down about 1.2 million. And then this category other is down 3 million. And that's mainly because we're not adding into our savings funds right now. And so another perspective is looking back to last year. So where we were now at this point last year versus where we are now this year. So in terms of comparison year over year, the Natick Public Schools allocation is down 700,000. The municipal is down 800,000. The shared is down 600,000, and other is down 4.5 million, which again is a result of not adding into our stabilization funds in the way that we did in fiscal year 20. So here's the two perspectives side by side. And so I thought this was important to put in because we have seen essentially both of these charts in different colors, different format, but in different presentations. And so on the left is what the town administrator has used in a presentation, comparing the appropriation proposal now versus fiscal year 20. And there was an article in one of the local newspapers using this. And it's just a perspective to see that the cut breakdown. So this is the percentage of cuts for each of those categories. And then the graphic on the right is a graph similar to what the school committee has used, comparing to fiscal year 21 preliminary. And so it's showing that compared to January, before COVID hit, of this year, Natick Public Schools is taking 75% of that overall revenue shortfall. And so I think one thing to consider when you're looking at these, and the question that you may ask yourself is, how do our needs now compared to our needs in January? And in a lot of ways, I would say the needs of a lot of parts in town, a lot of departments in town is similar. And if anything, the needs of some departments might be more because of COVID. So just a way to reflect on these two different perspectives and how the cuts are taken.
So what else have we learned?
So how has the Natick Public Schools budget specifically changed since January? So this is sort of like a timeline through the budget process. So those first two bars are FY20, and there's two FY20 numbers. The reason is that the Natick Public Schools got an allocation from the town of $67.8 million. That was their allocation. Then they were able to add some of their own personal savings counts, basically, to get to $69 million in FY20. So what the schools actually spent in FY20 was $69 million. So that's those first two bars. Now in January, before COVID, the school committee voted on a budget of $72.8 million. And that included some new hires, that included a lot of level services for special ed, same size classes, all of those things. Then in between January and March, FinCom put in a lot of hours looking through and vetting, and the school committee was able to cut their budget down to $71.2 million. Then so that was after COVID, but then after more, March was before COVID. Then after COVID, on June 4th, they voted on another budget for $69 million. And then that yellow bar is what the town administrator is currently proposing for an allocation. And so we'll get more in depth into that, and specifically how they got down from January to June, $3.8 million.
So how has that Natick Public's budget changed by $3.8 million? First, if we look on the chart on the right, it's the areas of savings. So Emily had mentioned that originally in January, they had proposed some new hires, and most of those have been cut since the original January budget. We also know it's been very you know, we're all grateful for the teachers because they opened up the contract and they agreed to take a 0% COLA, the teachers, the paraprofessionals, and the administrative assistants. So that, you know, added about $1.3 million to savings from the original budget. And they're going to take some money from the revolving accounts that they have, the savings accounts, the circuit breaker, and move it into their general operating budget. So that all of those savings allow them to cut that budget in January down to the budget that we now have in June. One addition that has been added is the staffing for 2 new preschool classrooms. And that is a conversation that is still ongoing in the FinCom, because while preschools do bring in revenue, they also cost the town and they cost the shared budget. So there's a conversation happening around the preschools. But that gives you what has changed in the budget. And things that we're thinking about, or questions we've been asked is, so is the original list off the table? The original list that got us all involved in this, is Johnson saved? Is our sports and theater back on for next year? Does world language happen? Essentially, the answer is everything is still on the table until town meeting votes. Until we actually have that appropriation, then we know how much money we have. We can say that there's been a lot of assurances given to us that or mentioned, I think, in the last school committee meeting, that they are relieved that they don't think that they have to go down the original path that they thought that they had to. Another question we're asking is, if more revenue becomes available in the fall, if the state is able to come up with their budget and produce the numbers for the state aid and they're better than what we expected, what is the priority for those funds? And we understand now that the school committee is working with the select board to actually write a document about the priority of those funds. And when we see that, we will certainly share it. But as you know, there's still a gap, because this doesn't get us down fully, right, if you look at this graph, there's still a gap between this last purple one and this yellow. So how does that gap get closed? We'll talk about that in our frequently asked questions. The municipal budget has also changed by about $500,000. So again, let's start with the savings. The suggestions in the town administrator's amended budget on June 8th included savings of things like closing the public buildings on Mondays, doing and working the different budgets like the police and the parks and recs and the facilities manager, doing things within those budgets that would save money. In addition to the library. So all of those savings give us $825,000. There's also been additions, Public Works, there's an additional trash fee. There's a suggestion now to add a position to the town administrator's office, and potentially to increase the salary of someone in the finance department. So those, when you subtract the additions against the savings, you come up with the $500,000 difference in the municipal budget. And there's areas of concerns in this budget as well, because with elections happening in this season, does it make sense to close town hall on Mondays? Does it, additionally, does it place too much burden on our employees in Natick? Are those the people that depend upon their salary the most? And so could we protect them more? Also, have the department heads' suggestions been taken account into these budgets? We know in attending some of the subcommittee meetings for the FinCom that the department heads had, some of the department heads had other ideas of how the savings could be realized. Specifically, we listened this week to the facilities manager, Mr. Gadsden, speak about his project manager position, advocating for that to stay in the budget because it is a long-term savings for both the schools and the municipal. That's the person that manages the Kennedy Middle School and really is doing sort of the strategic thinking behind all of our buildings. Just cutting that position makes sense. And like I mentioned before, does a salary increase of any kind make sense in this recession? So let's get into our frequently asked questions.
Okay, so one question that we've gotten a lot on our Facebook page and just through email and stuff is about the municipal budget growth. So one thing that's really important to note about this graph is that it's two different colors for a reason. The tealish colored bars are all actual spending amounts, and the green bars are budgeted appropriations. And those are two very different things, and we'll talk more about that later. So it looks like between FY19 and FY20, there's this big gap, big jump. And that may end up being true as we close out FY20 and that becomes an actual spending bar, but maybe don't infer that yet because they're two different animals. So the average growth from FY13 to FY19 for that municipal budget was 4.6% year over year. So what's included in that growth, and this is going to be somewhat similar to the schools, increases in salaries and positions, a lot of those being union salaries. And so that's a legal contract. So those are things that you have to do. Then also increases in equipment, capital, things like that. It's important to note that in this municipal category, things like pensions, healthcare, liability insurance, things like that are not included. Those are in the shared category because as we all know, pensions, healthcare, insurance, those rise very quickly. That's not included in this. Those are actually much higher. But yes, the simple answer is yes, the municipal budget does grow. So how does the NPS budget grow? So these orangish bars are all allocation amounts. And typically the schools spend their entire allocation. So it isn't the same thing as municipal where you can't compare budgeted and allocated as easily. So these are all allocations. Between FY13 and FY21, the average growth of the NPS allocation was 4.6%. And similar to municipal, this includes increases to salaries and positions. But unlike municipal, it's increases to legally mandated special ed requirements, updates to technology and curriculum. And then there's sort of this question over enrollment. Certainly back in 13, 14, 15, there was an enrollment bubble. And that's one of our areas of concern is how can we objectively consider the pattern of enrollment in Natick to guide growth of budget? So there isn't a great enrollment study right now to see where the school's enrollment is going. And it's going to be a difficult time to get that enrollment study because of COVID. It's going to just throw everything off. But certainly if our schools are growing by 100 students a year, that's going to indicate something different than if our schools are dropping by 100 students a year. So that's just something that we'll continue to keep our eye on and see if we can get good projections for that. The second area of concern is as you look from FY20 to FY21, the proposal for funding for this year for allocation for the Natick Public Schools is a less than level funded budget. So level funding meaning they receive the same amount of funding this year as they did last year. And so how does that impact schools? And this is sort of something that remains to be seen. And as we consider, can we keep doing this year over year? How does it impact our class sizes? How does it impact what teachers we draw to our system? Things like that. And so that's another area of concern that we'll be keeping our eye on.
Another question we've received a lot is about the revenue of the town in general fiscal year 20. So, and that comes back to this question about turnbacks. How are turnbacks managed by the town of Natick? So in the purple box, you'll see just some basic definitions. A turnback is a term that's used in the municipal budget, and it's money that's just not spent in the fiscal year. So the DPW, for example, ends up not filling a salary or a position, or maybe doesn't need a new truck that they thought they needed last year. So at the end of their year, they would have money left over. Now, oftentimes that the money that's left over is then carefully considered and said, oh, okay, we understand why you have that money left over. You weren't able to fulfill that position. That makes sense. Or, you know, they could say, well, we just didn't have time to buy that truck. We're going to do it next year. And there's a process to apply to keep that money. Sometimes, though, an amount of money gets turned back into free cash, and that's a municipal budget. Like that, back in that original slide, that green. All of those different budgets, like the library, the DPW, the police, fire, that's what they do. It's not ever usually a very significant amount of money because Natick is good. We budget appropriately. The money that does get turned into free cash I'll talk about that in a second, but let's start with what is free cash. So free cash is the allocation that wasn't spent in the previous year, or the turnbacks. And it's also when revenue comes in higher than what we projected in the budget. So those are the two items that really increase the free cash. And then in free cash, typically in the fall town meeting, our town meeting members vote to put the free cash into things like capital or pension or stabilization funds. And basically, if you think about it as like a person's salary, free cash is kind of like a bonus that a person gets. And so it's not something you're ever planning on, but when it's there, it's, you're excited, and you can go back to your list of, okay, what are those house projects we never get to spend money on that now we have some extra cash to spend on? The same thing happens in the town. So that yellow box at the very bottom, what happened this year? COVID happened this year, right? So all of the free spending got frozen in both municipal and the schools sometime in March, in the middle of March. The municipal used a lot of those savings, the potential turnbacks, to end the FY20 without a deficit. So we haven't seen those numbers, but that is what we've been told in the town administrators in her presentations to the Board of Selectmen. Natick Public Schools also had savings or turnbacks. Typically, they never have the amount that they have, or any at all. And so that's a question about where those savings are going to go, and what the free cash will actually look like in the fall. Typically in Natick, we've had years where there's been free cash to distribute. In the middle of this crisis, will there be any free cash at all? That's a question for us to be asking. So this graph is specifically related to the school savings. So in March, you see, if you see the text on the right-hand side, in fiscal year 20, NPS did not use $2 million of their allocation. Again, I want to stress that this is very uncommon. It's only because of COVID. And so they have this amount of cash, and they're thinking, the schools are considering prepaying up to 3 months of out-of-district special education with that money. They voted recently to do this. And if you combine that money with the money that they've been allocated by the town administrator, you go to the purple bar. If you combine the money they just agreed to spend for the out-of-district tuition with the town administrator's bar, that gets us to the $69 million that the schools will need to spend in fiscal year 21. Our areas of concern from Protect Natick's Future are all the key players in agreement about what to do with this $2 million. And how does the $2 million, if it's spent in this way, the way the school committee voted, how does it affect fiscal year 22 and beyond? Typically, the next year's appropriation begins with what the town administrator gave. So there's concern that fiscal year 22 will start at $67 million. So there's some concern around that.
So one more frequently asked question, I think this is our last one. How will we pay for expenses related to COVID when we're looking at opening schools? And so really when we're looking at opening the town. So through federal aid, through this CARES Act, Natick is eligible for up to $3.1 million. And so far a request has been sent in for $2.9 million of that. And so the needs that were applied for in that application were core municipal needs, like PPE for community workers, things like that, expanded public health missions, signage, translation for signage, things like that. But the majority of that 2.9 million, 2.8 million of it is going in this category called other, which we've been told goes towards retrofitting buildings, town buildings, school buildings. So when you think about the amount of things that need to go into retrofitting a school, you can see where a lot of that money can come from. So things that the school specifically requested that are not in that application. The first one is PPE request. We're a little unclear on the numbers, whether that's in that. We've heard, yes, it is in it. We can't reconcile the numbers, but that's just a question of if it's in there. And then some potential FY21 items like compensatory special ed services. So special ed services that students didn't get in FY20 that will need to get made up in FY21. And then potential additional bus costs. If kids, and I'm not saying we've heard anything, but I'm just saying as an example, if kids have to go one group in the morning, one group in the afternoon, you'd have double the bus costs. We think the reason why these aren't in there is maybe because they are expenses not yet incurred, or they're not definite costs, whereas we definitely have to retrofit buildings. And then the last thing that wasn't in there that we just picked up on was services and support to residents in their homes. So with the senior center being closed right now, that might be an area where our residents might need more support. So some areas of concern we have with this are, what was the process to compile this joint application? So this was a joint application filed by the town administrator jointly for the schools in the town. Why was money, quote, left on the table? So you can see we have some additional money available. It sounds as though you can put in another application, and so that may just be the case, but we're not exactly sure on that. And then where will the money come from to meet needs not requested? So for example, in the fall, if the schools do need to send out another round of buses every day, where will that money come from? Because clearly there's no extra money in the allocation. And so that would be something that town meeting would decide in the fall by either taking some money out of stabilization funds or some other way.
Thank you, Emily. And then our last frequently asked question is about the spring 2020 town meeting that will now happen in the middle of the summer potentially. But I'm going to turn off my screen share. I know many of you are town meeting members, and I believe the town moderator is here.
Yes.
This will move. Okay, this will move us into our discussion period. And before you speak, Frank, could I just invite whoever feels comfortable to turn on your videos, just so we could actually have an in-person conversation. And so I'll turn it over to Frank. Frank, we've heard you know, that it's going to be a virtual meeting potentially on July 11th. So give us an update. Let us know what you're thinking.
Okay, here's what we know today. Town meeting, as you all know, has been postponed from April 12th through to July 7th. We will have a very, very short meeting at Wilson Middle School where the town clerk, myself, and maybe a few town meeting members will adjourn town meeting till July 11th. There's an issue with the time that we're going to be dealing with, I think, at the selectmen's meeting. So I don't want to be, I want to make sure everybody realizes that it may start at either 10 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock. That's a issue, and we're working those bugs out. So in any event, we're going to have town meeting on the 11th. We are going to parcel all of the questions that are on the warrant right now into a couple of buckets so that we focus on the finances only on Saturday. So just so that everybody is prepared, we're hoping that that is when we take up the budget and make some serious decisions. I think you all understand that many of the appropriations and expenditures by departments, including the school department as schools as a department of the whole town budget, are funded through town meeting's appropriation. And quite frankly, I just want to make the other thing clear about town meeting is the town administrator may have a budget, the school department may have a budget, but town meeting will essentially make the final decision and set the budget going forward, to which maybe change a number of times throughout the year. So I think that that process that we're going to get into on the 11th, and hopefully no other days, but you never know how town meeting will act. But we certainly will deal with the budget on the 11th. I'm going to put up a schedule so that there are times that we're going to target for starting these things. So keep an eye out there. Okay, for this group specifically, as participation at town meeting, you want to get into that, Catherine? Will that help?
Sure. You're talking about the virtual setting of it?
Yeah.
And, yeah, please. Just
Yeah.
a couple more
Okay.
minutes though.
That's fine. I'll keep it short. Town meeting is your meeting. It's the town's meeting. It's not the meeting of the representatives only. Although they are there to vote on your behalf and make, just like the legislator of the state votes on our behalf, we also have an ability to partake in the discussion at town meeting. So town meeting members will be provided access to the Zoom meeting, and all other participants will use the call-in features to the Zoom meeting. We're going to have a number of deputy moderators who are going to help me gather the call-in request to speak, as well as the town meeting members' request to speak, or even the town administrator and the agencies of the town. Everybody has a play in partaking in this process. Again, only town meeting members can move a motion, and I've talked to a number of you about how that might happen if you're thinking of making suggestions in the budget, that's something that solely is the responsibility of the town administrator, town meeting members, excuse me.
Yeah.
So you will have a call-in designation, and you're also welcome, and it'd be appropriate if you want to dial in or call in to the 2 practice sessions we're going to have for town meeting. One is going to be on the 8th and the other on the 10th. I know it's a Friday night, but not everybody can make Wednesday night. And for that, and following that, I'm hoping that time permits, that we can have an open discussion, not only on process, but also on some of the substantive matters that are going to be before town meeting. So that latter part of the practice session might very well be fruitful for you folks too, to hear what the town meeting members are thinking.
Absolutely.
I think that's my 2 minutes, Catherine. And one
It's
final
okay. You're
thing.
going to do the same thing to me one day, so that's fine.
Oh, I'm gonna rattle you for sure. No, no, I'm only kidding.
He's talking about the
one-
town meeting. There's limits at town meeting as to how long you can speak.
Yeah, there's usually a 10-minute speaking limit. I'm proposing that limit be 5 minutes. So two words of warning: plan your speaking. Not only what you personally want to say, but possibly what you as a group want to say in multiple speakers.
Yeah, well, but today this is
predetermined to me what you want to speak, or
yeah,
when you want to speak. So
that's great.
I just wanted to talk about that.
No, it's really helpful. We will definitely be advertising those practice sessions. I also know that they'll be on Pegasus, and I think Yes for Natick is planning to do a Zoom call as well. So we will definitely advertise all of those. But let's open it up now. Kim, I know that the chat box has been busy. So
the chat box has been busy. I just wanted to give Moderator Foss 1 second because he made a comment about the CARES Act that they had submitted only for FY20, and I know that has been a bit confusing because some of the language suggested maybe it'd be also FY21. So I thought this would be a good point, since you just spoke, to maybe just clarify some of that.
Maybe even I need to have it clarified, but I was speaking to the town administrator, and it's my understanding that application is for FY20 expenses only, and costs that may overrun into FY21. There may be other funds and availability to cover COVID costs otherwise, but I think the application that was filed is limited in its scope, and I think either her or Mr. Townsend mentioned that in a meeting, but you may want to qualify that or
so that is a question. We have asked that question to the town administrator.
Okay.
The document is named FY20, so that was our assumption. We know that the federal funding was allowed to be spent up until FY21, and so I think that maybe that's what the confusion is. Natick has been given $3.1 million total. Will there be more federal funding and state aid coming? Hopefully, because clearly the 3.1 is not enough to cover it seems from my perspective to cover what was already spent in FY20 and these projected cost of cleaning and buses and PPE for FY21. I think
Okay.
everyone gets how expensive opening up a school is going to be.
Oh,
Linda,
it's gonna be huge.
Yeah.
Linda, jump in here.
Yeah, Catherine, if you don't mind, I actually had a conversation with the town administrator yesterday about this.
Fantastic.
And briefly, without going into detail, yes, it's only been FY20 expenses. The portal is not open up for FY21 yet.
There we
And
go.
she stated that she has submitted the whole $3.1 million. It might
Okay.
not show up on the submission, but there are things that might not be counted because maybe they're FEMA eligible or whatever, but I think we'll be getting more detail on that. But I can assure you that it's FY20, and she said that the full 3.1 was submitted.
Okay, so I'm just going to go back through the chat so others get a chance to hear the questions asked and if you want further clarification. I'm also, we'll watch and see if any hands are raised and try to let people speak in the order that they raise their hands. So the first question was about, was the TA's FY21 January, what was the TA's 21 fiscal year 21 January NPS allocation? And Emily answered that it was 71.2. And then there was a follow-up question, so that the town administrator's January was the same as the school committee's March. And that was correct. Before COVID hit, they were only apart by 300,000. Were there more follow-up, Cody's, to that, to your question?
No, I think it was answered by for me, it was answered in the chat. So thank you.
I just wanted to show this here. I think this is what we're talking about. Emily, do you want to speak to this graph again?
Oh yeah, so that March bar before COVID hit was
This one right here.
pretty much the same for the town administrator's appropriations school committee. I mean, 300,000 apart.
And I think Linda had her hand up for further commentary. Yes? Or are you going to ask a different question?
No, and I realize time is short here if you'd like to get to other questions. I just was going to tell you about what the FinCom process was going forward. So I'll leave that up to you if you want to hear a brief discussion of that, or if you'd rather go and have more questions answered.
What would you like, Catherine?
I think hearing the FinCom process would be very helpful to a lot of people.
Okay. So just for information, only on Thursday did our education subcommittee receive a presentation on the MPS budget. And so they're going to be taking some time to look at that and have additional meetings next week. So we are not even concluded with our subcommittee meeting process yet. The goal is for next week, we'll have a general overview of the presentation to level set the understanding among our finance committee members about where we're at. And we'll start getting into the budget details Thursday. And that leaves us another week. Ideally, we would have been finished the following Tuesday in order to make our deadline for, we have to provide recommendations to town meeting 7 days in advance of town meeting. The moderator has been gracious and said that might be 7 days before the July 11th meeting. However, there's the 4th of July holiday in there, so it's going to be a little tricky. So I just wanted to let you know the timing. So we'll have next week, Thursday, we'll be getting into the budget numbers, and then the following week, Tuesday and potentially Thursday. And if there are any questions for Finance Committee, we've set up an email address, fincom@natickma.org. So we'll be happy to receive questions there.
Thank you, Linda. And before I had said that the FinCom can either recommend or not recommend, can you clarify what the FinCom will actually do?
Right, so we can do a number of things. We can recommend favorable action. We can recommend referral. We can recommend no action, or we cannot have a recommendation at all. So those are the possibilities. So we'll have to see how it all plays out.
Thank you for doing it. I want to say that Linda and other FinCom members are entirely volunteers with a lot of experience or just desire to dig into the budgets. And so thank you in advance from me and from other residents in Natick that realize how much time you put in.
Well, and if I can just add, I am thrilled to see the level of participation here amongst all of you. And it's really exciting as a town to have so many people interested in what's going on, and the level of detail that you're going into is, I think, if not helpful for this year's budget, it will be certainly needed going forward when we have to look at other alternatives. So I'm very grateful to all of you and all the work that you've done so far and will continue to do.
Thank you, Linda.
I think Stephen may have had a follow-up question to what Linda just said. Yes, Stephen?
Yeah, Linda, I was wondering if you listed out 4 different possibilities for what FinCom can recommend. Could you say a little bit more about what each of those means? Like, I've heard the term referral a few times, but it's not super clear exactly what that means from a real operational, meaningful point of view.
So referral typically means that we are recommending that, and we will refer it to a specific group or organization. And you'll notice if you see the town meeting warrant articles, that our recommendations are to referral to. So it might be referral to the sponsor, referral to the sponsor or the town moderator. So that's saying, hey, now it's in your court. Referral for, a motion for no action means we're not really recommending anything happen with this. However, neither one at a subsequent town meeting, anyone, even with a no action or a referral motion, can put forward another motion. And I neglected to mention one, excuse me, and Frank's probably gritting his teeth in the background, and that's indefinite postponement. And that is a stronger...
Linda, don't do that.
So I don't really want to waste your time going into it more there, but let's leave it at that. That's an option, and an option for town meeting as well to recommend that.
Can I add just one thought? The Finance Committee is actually empowered and required by the bylaws to take the budget that's being proposed, and if they deem so appropriate, they can amend that budget. And their amendments through their vetting process could then go as a positive motion before town meeting and be enacted as such. So that's one other piece, and that's actually part of what Linda said, favorable action. That's a piece of that action.
Thank you. I know we're getting up to 11, but there are a couple of questions that were to specific slides. Specifically, I think Stephen had a question about slide 21, and there was a question about the slides with the 2 pie charts that show the differences in budget. So I just wanted to make sure we got Stephen's question on slide 22 was whether the service delivered increased commensurate.
So I think it was 21.
Oh, 21. I'm sorry, 21. I'm sorry. It was 21. I thought it was 22. Both counts, I would ask whether the service delivered increased commensurate with the budget growth, i.e. is that growth justified in a reasonable expectation for its value?
I think it's an excellent question, and I think it's a question that we've also asked. And specifically, we've asked what metrics are used to figure out if we're essentially getting our bang for our buck. So I think that's something that we'll keep looking into. One metric that we've heard that's pretty important for the school's budget is its graduation rates. And so, you can look all of this up in the budget book for the schools, and it's on one of these slides. There's a link to it. In terms of municipal, I personally don't know what metrics they use to figure that out, but I think that's an excellent question.
And in particular, I'm always very suspicious when I see consistent growth rates that exceed the growth rate of the economy. And with some acknowledgement that sometimes organizations budget for their own growth rather than for necessarily the value that is actually needed.
Yeah, and I think comments on Facebook and things like that, a lot of people have that same question. And so that's something that we'll definitely get into, especially as we go into next year. But yeah, I think that's a great question.
Thank you.
So then both Patty and Elizabeth had questions about the slide with the two pie charts. Patty said that the pie chart of how our leaders are presenting numbers is telling. The messaging is totally different. How do we get the messaging in sync so we know which is the correct allocation and correct percentage of funding to each department? We need to be all on the same page with messaging. Elizabeth agreed, but I think she had a further question. Yeah, she just wanted a further group discussion about these two pie charts. So I don't know if Elizabeth wants to say something more specific or have more specific questions.
Yeah, thank you. I was just I think it's essential in order to get some sort of constructive meeting of the mind, that this needs to be reconciled, or I guess greater understanding, because there's such a disparity and it's obviously leading to roadblock on some sort of collaborative meeting of the mind. So I think there needs to be some coming together to understand this huge discrepancy, 75% versus 36%.
Yeah, and if I may, Elizabeth, that
I was just going to say it's essential as well that the public understand and town meeting members understand, because there's a very short amount of time before this needs to be acted on, and it's such a disparity in numbers. I think that people need to be clear and have good information to make informed choices.
Yeah, I so appreciate that, and I think that that's what struck us, because we had attended both meetings, and thankfully Emily knows how to make these graphs, and it was just striking to us, because you can sit in the meetings and you can hear the perspective, and then you hear a totally different perspective. And I think our idea is that this will happen in the FinCom, right? That we want to show that this is what's been presented, and that it's up to the FinCom really then to figure out how to, make these graphs maybe look a little more similar. Do you
Well,
agree,
I think
Emily?
the thing I hope I made clear was that we're certainly not saying one is right and one is wrong. And I think the two together provide the full perspective. So it's not, at least we're not saying we should only be looking this way or we should only be looking this way. I think it depends on what you're trying to look at. If you're trying to look at how the cuts relate to this, before COVID happened, and you're looking at the impacts on things before COVID, then you use one. But I think it's important that we can't just say, well, why don't we all just stick to using one? It's because both of them are really relevant. If we only look at the preliminary budget one, then we're basically just assuming that we're going to increase year over year. Whereas if we look at the FY20, we're saying, okay, let's look level and then go from there. So I think you're totally right, though, and that's the reason why I think we wanted it on here, is that I think it's really tricky for people when you all of a sudden see two completely different numbers and it feels like they're trying to explain the same thing. So it's just, it's just information that these are two different ways, and there's 100 other different ways to look at it, but these are two that have been presented.
Cody had a follow-up question, and then Elizabeth had another follow-up question. So Cody?
Yeah, I guess it's just a comment, but I thought that, I had the same reaction, that it is really striking. I mean, of course, both are accurate, right? Like they're both just comparing to different budgets, but it just seems like the schools committee's budget is so much more captures like the reality of what has happened, right? That there was a preliminary budget before that, like, basically the town administrator and the school committee basically, we're in the, like you were talking about before, we're basically in the same page about. Then COVID happened, and now this is how we're allocating the cuts from COVID. And so I don't the town administrator's budget, the picture that comparing to FY20 is certainly accurate in terms of a comparison, but it just doesn't seem that relevant, because what we're talking about is what decisions are we making about what is being cut as a result of what's happened. And so the comparison to 20, it's like, well, that's just showing what we were going to increase anyways. I don't know. I mean, just a thought on that.
Yeah, and I guess too, the perspective that we've heard behind these, the graph on the left would be the perspective, so much has happened and so much is different that we're starting fresh. We're starting with our FY20 and we're going from there. And then the graphic on the right is the perspective, well, our needs are the same as where they were in January. This crazy thing has happened, but our needs are still there. So those are the two kind of different opinions. And again, there's like 500 other opinions, but those are two ones.
I would say too that the graph on the left also demonstrates the money that we know that we spent, right? Isn't there like an actual they're not actual numbers, but that's what we know happened in FY20. And so in some ways, I think that people feel that perspective is important to look at because there's a stableness there. It was money
Right.
that we actually spent.
Yeah, and that FY20 was actually voted through. That FY20 budget was voted through by town meeting.
Right.
Whereas that graphic on the right, those January numbers were never actually voted through from town meeting. They were just preliminary. So that's another perspective.
If I can just clarify that the FY20 numbers, as was just stated, were the budget numbers that town meeting appropriated. They are not actuals.
Thank
They
you.
are as much of an estimated budget as FY21.
Yeah.
Elizabeth?
I was just going to say, I think, my mic is on. Yeah, I think that's the whole thing, is like trying to use credible numbers and what was actually spent. I think it skews my understanding. So the current year's budget, Natick Public Schools was allocated a certain amount and used $2 million or more additional out of their own savings to actually deliver the services that we're getting. So I don't think using the last year's allocated amount is a reasonable baseline, because it doesn't represent the sum total of what was needed. And I guess we haven't seen yet if it's used, but until the fiscal year 20 is over. But it just seems like the whole apples and oranges issue, in order to have a credible base in terms of what was needed. And then if you tack onto that the additional COVID expenses and growth and everything, it just seems like we need to try to get to as comparable a baseline as we can, so that the numbers or a comparison is appropriate.
Agree.
So
Were there any other?
Stephen had asked a couple of questions in the comments, and I just want to make sure he had a chance to explain any of the questions or get further answers.
First, to follow up on this one, I was wondering, no, we can't have an official closure to fiscal year 20 until fiscal year 20 is over, and then there's some additional follow-on accounting. But apparently there's been enough accounting that the town administrator feels that turnbacks are necessary to make up for some deficit in municipal. So there's some approximation accounting that's available there. Is that something that's only available internally for budgeting purposes, or is that something that can be shared? Because that's probably the closest thing we have to a fiscal year 20 actual, as opposed to a fiscal year 20 appropriated.
Linda, do you want to answer that question? It's a great question. That's over my pay scale.
Yeah, I can tell you what we have received from so far from FinCom, and I have to tell you, I don't know all the caveats associated with it, which was the actual spending in Munis through the end of May for both the municipal side and the school department side. And they're both about 80% of budgeted numbers.
Okay.
And all I can tell you is I don't know the details behind that. I don't know what might be upcoming that is 1 month left of the fiscal year. What else might not be included in that? That's something that we probably will be discussing at the finance committee meeting, but we did get reports with not the explanatory detail behind it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That helps. Thank you. Yeah, the other questions I had were, there are some facilities costs that I haven't heard anybody mention about in association with various closings, the ones that have occurred and the ones that are proposed. For example, it's a common practice, if you can close an entire building, to reduce the temperatures such that, to what's only minimally necessary, rather than, especially when it's adjacent to a weekend. And that's amounted to huge savings in the corporate world, with companies designating Monday or Friday as, work from home days and so on, even before COVID. And then there's utility costs of, not using light, not keeping things lit beyond safety lighting, so on and so forth. And I haven't seen any of those discussed as factors in either projected savings or as reduced expenses for fiscal year 20 so far.
I would expect that we'll see some of those numbers in the subcom meetings in the coming weeks. For example, the school department just presented to the sub-ed committee, and in their slides that I think are available on our website. Is that right, Kate? Are those slides available in the forum? I think if you...
They're actually a link to in slide 17. There's a link.
Oh, great. So like, this was the first time we saw it this week where the schools identified the money that they saved by turning the temperature down in the buildings or not turning on the air conditioner. So I think it's, I mean, it's just like, to Linda's point, it's great that you're asking that question and that our town leaders know that more than just the FinCom is asking that question.
I can say as far as next year, we've sat in on a lot of meetings and we haven't seen any slides about projecting that sort of savings next year yet. I think because it's just so much unknown in the fall. I haven't seen it. Linda?
I can tell you what we've seen so far in the DPW subcommittee, which handles the utilities for the municipal side of the town, not the school side, that they are only really projecting savings in fuel based on diesel and gasoline prices, and everything else. A lot of it is under contract. They're just not sure. So I don't believe that any savings have been taken into account other than with fuel.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I've attended a lot of the meetings and have not seen that discussed as a factor, even when in association with things like proposed closings of municipal offices, proposed reduction of library hours, et cetera, and so forth.
Yeah. I think many of us have a similar question about the reopening of schools. Like if reopening schools is going to look different, does our budget reflect what a school year in 2020-21 will look like with COVID? Linda's nodding, so I think that the FinCom is also asking those questions. And I mean, God help these people. This is awful to have to do all these numbers.
If I can just say, I know that the school department is putting together a lot of scenarios, but they are awaiting guidance from the state.
Yep.
And they don't know what they don't know at this point on a lot of these issues. So all they can do is the best that they can.
One of my favorite quotes from Parks and Recs is, if it's government work, it's worth doing twice. Okay, thank you so much for hanging in there. Kim, is there anybody else that, I don't want to cut anybody off, but I realize it's a Saturday.
There's one comment from Eileen that I'll read, and then if anybody else feels that something hasn't been asked, I'd ask them to raise their hand. From Eileen, she said the $850,000 NPS added to their appropriated amount in FY20 needs to be a real part of the conversation. I actually needed and actually spent is, in my mind, the realistic baseline to consider. I arrived late, but I assume you spoke about this earlier in the presentation.
Yeah, we spoke about it a little bit in slide 16, but the difference between the allocation of FY21 and then what the schools needed to add to that to get to a full budget.
Yeah.
Good point.
Anybody else?
And if you're running for town meeting, can you wave your hand so people can see your name, or
you can type your precinct in the chat, your name and your precinct in the chat, especially if you're a write-in too.
Good luck in that election, and thank you so much for being with us. I just wanted to share one more slide, and that is, I have to scroll down there. My slides do not want to work. So just to recap what Protect Natick's Future is asking, do the budgets share the revenue deficit? And are all the cuts that are being proposed, are they safe and are they reversible? Do they reflect the COVID-19 realities that do not increase density and they do not create a loss in mental health? Can we maintain essential services, maintain class sizes, and I would say also maintain jobs that we think are essential? And do they maintain the activities in our town that benefits people's lives? If we come to town meeting and we're in that place where we feel like we've made all the cuts we can make and that we've shared it the best way we can share it, is it responsible for us to use more of our stabilization funds or our savings? We went over that in detail in our first presentation, and I'd be very happy to talk to anybody that would like to talk about that, because that is a very important town meeting question that's going to be asked. And for the future, looking ahead to FY22 and 23, what steps can be taken to alleviate Natick's budget strains in the future? So please vote. Please show up to as many meetings as you can. I know it's tough with kids and elderly parents, you know, people taking care of all different kinds of ages right now during the COVID-19 crisis. Do what you can. The meetings are on Pegasus. Also, Facebook is very active on a couple of chats. Stay informed, and please email us or join our email list. If you're not a town meeting member, please talk to them and make sure that they are paying attention. We think that there's going to need to be a lot of homework done before you walk into town meeting or before you turn your computer on this year for town meeting. So thank you so much for being with us. Enjoy the rest of the beautiful day. We're grateful for all of you to be here.
Thanks.